Hello, and welcome to the Real National Dialogue, brought to you by the South Africa Brief, supported by the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. I'm joined here by my esteemed colleague, Mr. Berkowitz. Paul, how are you doing?
This is wonderful, isn't it, Jonathan? This is a professional setup. I'm great. The weather in Johannesburg is playing really nice. It's great to be here with you face to face in person.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to have an in-person discussion. And thanks again to the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for allowing us to be in this great venue and record things professionally and properly. And to launch this professional conversation, we are very, very pleased and honored to be joined by our guest, Lukhona Mnguni. Lukhona, thanks so much for joining us. Lukhona is probably one of the top political analysts, not only in South Africa, but in Africa. And we thought that we'd kick off this podcast series by talking to Lukhona about the broad state of South African politics. But Lukhona, thanks so much for being here.
No, thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you, Paul, for the invite. It's always good to see things graduate from an idea into, something much more impactful. And I think that these kind of conversations you are going to be having are going to help a number of people navigate and think and rethink and probably introspect about where our country is and within the world where it is going.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such an interesting and critical time in South African politics, but as you say, in global politics. Before we get into the meaty stuff of politics, for those that may not know you, Lukhona, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey. How do you come to being one of South Africa's top political analysts, a broadcaster, commentator, many other things thrown in between?
Well, as you might know, the greatest defining thing about me is that I'm a villager. And I always say I'm a villager caught in urban trappings. If you were to ask me, do I love Joburg? Not because of how badly it has deteriorated. I've always thought this is a place of plastic people. I felt that, there in the village we've got, the real McCoy. And I think that's what has really shaped me. The opportunity to, I wouldn't say necessarily escape the village environment. I was one of those privileged villagers in the sense that I grew up in a fairly middle-class home in the sense of a village. My grandmother was an educated teacher. She went to Lovedale College. She graduated by 1950. She was in Lovedale College. And my grandfather later on would graduate. He left school, went to work. He came from a much more poorer background. But that mix and then they had a smaller family. They only had 2 surviving kids, my mom and my aunt. And so that made us a very close-knit family. So it was quite easy to struggle for opportunities. And I got the opportunity to go to boarding school for high school. My mom and my aunt had also gone to boarding school, just like my grandmother had. So that was an important foundation in terms of, it made me grow in a home that was curious about society, but that was also immersed in society. My grandmother was a community builder. My grandfather was very focused on our family and the broader family. And that helped me to see the world and to understand social justice from a very, very young age, and questions and concepts of solidarity. As much as my grandparents had 2 kids, there were always people around the house. Like, there were always many more children who were growing up in our family home and so on. And they were quite enterprising people, very much churchly. The only thing that I did and probably left halfway was to focus on the church as the site of, change, or as the vehicle that you use for change. And I felt that politics is probably a much, much broader arena that influences all many touch points of society. I still go to church, but the last part about politics, which was always a fascinating thing, because then I always thought there must be some political bone, because my instinct for politics is quite innate. It's not, I think I used to say to some friends, I think it's both almost like something that's planted in you, your purpose to pursue. So I don't always think that we make rational decisions. Some things find us, and we have to just commit to them. So I then bumped into this story from my grandmother. She says, no. When she married my grandfather in 1962, and she went to visit him in Durban, my grandfather was really much into politics, and there were all these political books at his place and stuff. And I remember growing up, there used to be a mini ANC flag in the 90s, and it just vanished. I don't know, it vanished. Maybe it was a precursor to things to come. It just vanished. But my grandmother then said, I told Umthembu, that's how she used to call my grandfather. I told Umthembu, I did not marry you to be widowed. And so my grandfather in that moment had to make a choice, because he had married this, woman. I wanted to build a family with her, and I think he then diverted his attention to the church. And so I asked him, would he have gone to exile ever? And he said, yes, had he gotten an opportunity to go and study ministry, he would have left South Africa for exile as part of his contribution. But if you hear the stories, they were struggling in the shop floor, in the workplace, in the communities. The UDF movements, the IFP attacks in the townships he used to live in. Lamontville still has a house there in Durban. So there is that kind of heritage. My mom, my aunt immersed in the teacher unions, doing work, volunteering themselves for associations, for this and that, but much more focused in community and so on. And I suppose because of the type of choices I made, and of course sometimes you have to make tough choices. So I left mining engineering. Most people don't know this.
Oh wow!
I did, because and I like saying that because when you do politics, they think you chose the course of last resort because the marks were not allowing you
the humanities stream.
The humanities stream. Yeah. No. I was a maths and science student, higher grade in my time. Passed very well. Got a bursary to study mining engineering at Wits University, and something just did not sit well with me at some point when we'll talk about the state of politics now. There was a moment in this country between 2005 and 2007 that, Zolinzi Mavavi and them were quite correct. They used to talk about an unstoppable tsunami that was coming, which was President Jacob Zuma. He had, been fired by Thabo Mbeki, which was an extraordinary act at the time, to think that a president would fire his second in command, who's also elected by conference from cabinet, simply because of some court judgment. These are the things that at that point in time, they shook the system, and then the subsequent politics and Polokwane happened. I was never an ANC member. I've never voted for the ANC for some strange reason. Maybe the flag vanished too soon.
A different way to measure support other than through ordinary traditional polling.
No, absolutely. And Polokwane happened. I remember I was at the mines at Goedehoop Colliery in Witbank, and the SASCO ANC guys just erupted with excitement. I remember that evening, the announcements were made in terms of who's the winner. If you think back to that video, General Simpiwe Nyanda was one of the first few to jump out of his seat when JZ was announced. I cried that night. I was very scared about what could become of South Africa's politics. It was the evidence for me was quite clear, and I suffer from what I call the disease of foresight. And so I see things down the line in a world where people aren't. And that's been part of my greatest gifts, actually, as a person who's trusted with public commentary, is to look ahead and really try and navigate and take people 5 years away from where they are. And that's why, you get a lot of flack. So I left engineering in 2009. I thought, I'm not going to be underground when these people are messing up on surface. So that's part of my journey into politics.
That's fantastic, Lukhona, and so thank you for sharing that with us, because I think it enriches the contribution. So I think you've covered a lot in the sort of, I suppose, the politics that shapes where we are today. So, Polokwane was groundbreaking at the time and probably set in motion quite a few things.
No, absolutely.
The proverbial chickens are coming home to roost now. So let's fast forward to where we are it's September 2025. It's 14, 15 months after an era-defining general election. We've discussed before, I don't think it was a change election per se, but it was certainly an election that has changed a lot of the political dynamics. We're about 15 months away from the earliest possible date, or 14 months away from the earliest possible date of a local government election, which is going to be fascinating. What is the state of South African politics at the moment?
And I mean, it's fascinating we're speaking in September because 17 years ago, we had the 8 days in September.
Of course,
you
yes.
remember Rev. Frank Chikane's
Yes.
book title. I mean, reflecting on the recall of former
Yes.
President Thabo Mbeki following the Chris Nicholson judgment. And really, South Africa's politics have been in flux and probably very centered around the maneuvers of one individual, and that's former President Jacob Zuma. And he continues to shape our politics. I mean, with Umkhonto weSizwe Party, we've seen breakaways from the ANC, at least in the democratic dispensation, whether it's the UDM, COPE, EFF. I think even in the ANC's own thinking, they never thought a former president could be so destructive to the point of breaking away and hurting the ANC. And it's not hurt for its own sake, but it's because what has happened to South Africa's politics over time, and this is exactly where we are now, is that it has gravitated and graduated into personality-based politics rather than ideas. I mean, some will say ideology. I still argue our politics are not ideological because the ANC itself is not an ideological entity. And so even though it's been a very hegemonic party in South Africa's politics, you now see it disintegrate. And what's most likely going to happen is that it's now actually going to disintegrate into its ideological fragments. So if you look at Umkhonto weSizwe Party, if you look at the South African Communist Party, I mean, who would have thought that the tripartite alliance as we sit here would have reached a formal stage of breakup? But again, it's unsurprising. There are things that have happened in the recent 15 to 20 years. I mean, there was an active undermining, for example, of the labor union COSATU and an attempt to break it up. And I think Zuma and them successfully broke up, labor component of the ANC, with SAFTU having to move out of COSATU, NUMSA, the biggest metals union, having to leave, and so on. There was a deliberate breakage of the ANC Youth League. At a time, the ANC Youth League in about 2010, I mean, if you remember, Zuma at the time as president, he missed the United Nations General Assembly to attend the NGC of the ANC in eThekwini. And that was the last NGC, by the way. That was the last robust NGC. I mean, they keep saying NGC is coming, NGC is...
It was supposed to be June, July, December this year.
And no NGC on site. They blamed COVID in 2020 or 2021. But look, so I like going back a little bit to understand where we are. So the breakage of the ANC Youth League, the expulsion and suspension of the likes of Floyd Shivambu, Julius Malema, Sindiso Magaqa, Ronald Lamula suspended, chose to stay inside, he's now Minister of Deco and so on. But the ANC started really being ravaged by a leadership that no longer cared about the glory of the ANC, but used the ANC as a vehicle for its own personal and material interests. Not to say there wasn't that prior to them, but in the last 15 years, that has really happened at a very supersonic speed. And I think it's influenced where we are. And where we are at the deathbed of the ANC. This is where we are. And no one is willing to pull the plug. Everybody's trying to keep the patient alive, but they can tell the patient is not going to wake up. And so, but because the patient is still alive, there's benefit to being seen, caring for the patient, taking pictures with the patient and so on. But I think what I've always worried about, and I've been worried about this for the last 7 years, is what would South Africa look like beyond the ANC? And how do you prepare for a South Africa beyond the ANC? And I think, unfortunately, we didn't prepare for a South Africa beyond the ANC. And so what's going to happen is that the ANC is going to be on its own free fall. I think there's absolutely no leadership center in the ANC. I mean, you see now how NEC members talk about the ANC. You get reports about an NEC member like Andile Lungisa standing up in a meeting of the NEC to say, comrades, let's dissolve ourselves. So 2027 is too far. We are messing up. And there's this realization, I mean, former Minister Naledi Pandor saying the ANC has lost its glory and so on. That ANC, understanding that disintegration and fragmentation of the ANC is important, because what it is most likely to do, you guys know this better, if you go to eThekwini Council, for example, you've got about 18, 19 parties that hold 23, 24 seats in a council of 220. And if you look at those parties with one seat, most of them are former ANC councillors, former ANC regional leaders, former ANC branch, and so on. So the disintegration of the ANC, what it's going to do is that it's going to fragment our politics completely. It's going to frustrate South Africans. So you look at UAT, the fellow in Limpopo who now has a seat in parliament and a seat in the Limpopo legislature, was in the ANC mix, ANC universe. So you'll get that fragmentation. It will frustrate people, and I think we are moving towards a politics where there's no anchor party. Where in different regions we'll see different iterations of the fragmentation and dominance, and you'll probably remain with the Western Cape that will have some form of an anchor party in terms of the DA. I think they too are also nervous though in terms of the medium to long term. You'll have KwaZulu-Natal where Umkhonto weSizwe Party will give the ANC a run for its money and probably dominate. And so you'll have this regionalization of our politics, which then what it does is it moves us away from nation building kind of politics. And I think South Africa is at a point, it's no longer a crossroads, where I think nation building is dead. And people are going to need to think differently. I'm not sure if the national dialogue is the best tool on how to revive a nation-building project. But I think what might well happen, your kind of, I mean, Stephen Groot has called it parties that are along apartheid identities. I don't think yes, there's a bit of that, but I think what we are missing is how regionalistic politics are becoming. And by very nature of the colonial and apartheid architecture, that boxes you into apartheid identities. I don't think parties are deliberately trying to, divide us. There are those who are doing that, but some are just fighting for their regionalistic interests. And by virtue of their regionalistic interests, they've got a particular color, they've got a particular ethnic group, and they've got a particular gender at times in terms of dominance and different structures that are there. So I think that's broadly where we are. I mean, there are a lot of segments, but I mean, you said you want us to paint the broader picture, and so I think we are in a politics of moving away from the ANC, the disintegration of the ANC, regionalization of our single issue and interest-based politics, personality politics, more than ideas. People just look at you. I mean, if you are still investing millions of rands trying to come up with manifestos, you're in the wrong business.
I'd like to jump on the last 2 points you've made, Lukhona, because obviously Jonathan and I, we spend an obsessive amount of time looking at the election next year, trying to pick apart what makes a local election, particularly the upcoming local election, different, unique. There are trends that have been identified, which I think are now common knowledge. You spoke about the fragmentation of politics. We've seen the flux. We know that the trend, particularly after 2024, from a donor's point of view, is they want more bang for their buck in a much more uncertain, much poorer environment. We've already been seeing in the last few weeks, and Jonathan and I have discussed this, that some of the smaller parties are, and some of the parties that you'd think were medium but are now living under reduced circumstances, like the Good Party, they're banding together. They are coordinating. We know this week that Build One SA and Rise and Good are talking. We know that Action SA has already reached out to regional parties like Forum for Service Delivery some months back. So without jumping too far ahead of the polls and where the big and the small parties are, I wanted to ask a question that's linked back, because your biography sparked an idea. Your family's been involved in organization in many different environments. There's the teachers and the family that have been involved through the unions. There's the church as an organizing force. Your work as well, particularly in the last few years, your work with Rivonia Circle has been about community building in large part. How do you see, particularly, and it can be for small parties and medium parties, let's not worry about the bigger four for now, what is the best way? What do you think is going to be the most efficient way in just over a year for communities to organize to maximize the chances of doing well? Does the fact that this election is going to be so heavily contested make it easier, give the independents and the smaller parties more of a chance than they've ever had, or are they just going to be lost in the clutter?
Sure.
If you can just answer those 5 questions in order, but I hope you get
Paul,
the general idea.
I get the general idea, and I think the first thing to say is that I think we are headed for an absolute wonder of an election. I think they are going to, if we were as super research focused and polling focused as some jurisdictions are around the world, I would say probably you and I won't go out of business.
Yeah, and more about that later or next week. But it's also a lot harder for us, isn't it, than the US and the UK?
But there's a point. I mean, because if you look at some of the data, I mean, take the US because it's super focused on these issues, and you get data points that are just like from state to state, and then within a state from county to county, from neighborhood to neighborhood. We don't have that kind of research, and I think the broader electorate and public is going to be poorer because there's an underinvestment, unfortunately, in that work, particularly even by the donors, by the way, who want to get more, output for what they put in politics, but they're not investing enough, I think, in research to try and help complement the decisions that they make in the donor circle. And I say this because, part of what you're asking about medium-sized parties and small parties, one of the things that small parties, and I remember interviewing, when I was still on radio, the president of Forum for Service Delivery before joining Action SA. And this was ahead of the 2021 local government elections. And he made the point that, they tried their hand in 2009 in the national election, and they realized that, no, we're a local government party. They've got tens and tens of councillors across about 4 provinces, right? Because, and I've always had this theory, I still hold this theory that you can build a party that literally just focuses on contesting local government elections, as well as you can build a party that actually does well in national elections, but poorly in local government elections. But South African politics is not that advanced. We're not there yet. We want to pick up all the spoils that are available to us. And I think then, of course, they did the counterintuitive thing for them for service delivery. They stood in the 2024 elections and they didn't do well. And now sort of they've joined with Action SA. Action SA had to create a new position that they didn't have of deputy president to accommodate for them for service delivery. It's mergers and acquisitions, I suppose. Yeah. But in an environment where politics are so personality based, I wonder whether or not the traditional support base of Forum for Service Delivery is attracted or alienated by the personality of Herman Mashaba. Because I am not sure that, nobody knows the president of Forum for Service Delivery. So these councillors were not doing extremely well on the basis of his personality, but probably on the ethos of their ability to organize locally, farm and find the right candidates, because local government elections, I think we're talking about this, Moxie. It's not an ideological election. It's not a big heart election. It's a logical election. Who do I believe is the best person to represent me in my community? I remember going in one community in Soweto. I won't say where because now I might give him away. But I met this fellow. He was an organizer for the EFF. This is during COVID as well, ahead of the 2021 elections. And he says, so he says, let's talk. So we talk. Then he says, here in this community, I'm organizing for the EFF and I'm signing up people. But on voting day, myself, I'm going to vote for that old man of the ANC because he has served us very well. Now, people make those differentiating points. You hear it from ANC members who live in DA-based wards, particularly in Tshwane, in Johannesburg, and they speak quite highly of the kind of service and servicing, and they are envious. And one ANC friend in Centurion said to me, "Hey, I see our friend is standing as a councillor candidate. She's not getting my vote. No, I'm happy with my DA guy." So I'm trying to raise these anecdotes to say perhaps what the medium-sized and smaller-sized parties that do not have overwhelming personalities who people believe behind them there's an army of generals who can be deployed to turn around, service deliveries, for them to read our landscape quite properly and ask themselves, where do they want to seed their growth nodes into the future? And that's going to depend, firstly, if the parties themselves believe they have a future, because there's sometimes a bit of nervousness amongst leaders of some parties that they're not too sure. I mean, if you talk about Good, for example, they knew that they needed to chase communities where Pat was sort of familiar with, but they chose them strategically as well, parts of Kimberley. I think they did a survey and they only contested, at the time when I interviewed them, about 500 or 550 wards across the country. So they were quite niche in George. They were quite clear where they wanted to go. They've got an MMC in the city of Tshwane. Not many people know that, but they've actually got a seat and
they had a chair of chairs in Johannesburg.
Chair of chairs in Johannesburg. Mm-hmm. So the point is that, but then all of this work is meaningless to the average person who sees the collapse of Johannesburg. Who's not interested in following political trends, is interested in following service delivery trends. And I think that's the disconnect that happens with local government elections. So, for example, the contest in the city of Johannesburg there's enough consensus amongst those of us who reluctantly even so reside here. You are a homebody here, so it's fine.
I live among the plastic people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But you're not a plastic person, so that's a good thing. But there's enough consensus in the city of Johannesburg that the next election is about rescuing Joburg. Yeah. There's no two ways about it. The math is not mathing. But in eThekwini, it's a different consideration altogether. If you look at the numbers, I mean, MK party is likely to be the anchor party there because what it has done is to sweep ANC structures, infiltrate ANC structures around this. So the election in eThekwini is simply an ANC fight kind of, or break up. So we're seeing the divorce of those who went to MK from the ANC, and it's not because they truly believe the MK party can rescue eThekwini. It's not going to be about. That's not the question. That's not the language that's being spoken. And therein lies the opportunity for smaller parties to then say, in these pockets of differentiated, circumstances, where do I think I want to naturally grow? So pick a space where, your Maluti Apufong, for example, they're not trying to get out of that area, but then there's a big demarcations question that might happen in that municipality ahead of the elections to try and break it up into 2 or 3 municipalities. I think it's going to cause a massive, massive fight in that region. And of course, that's another story for another day in terms of local government demarcations, gerrymandering and all of these things. Who sits in the demarcations board? How are they chosen? And all of that. But I'm trying to say the smaller parties are going to have to be very differentiated and be very honest with themselves as to whether or not they've got enough personnel to field. Because sometimes in politics, people are not honest with their own infrastructure, with their own capacity, and they're not mining the timber. They just think the timber is going to come to them. They're not nurturing the timber. They're not watering the seeds of political leadership. And I think if you can't sit in your office and say, I've got 1,000 strong group of ward councillor candidates whom I've met, I've trained. You'll know Salga is very worried about councillor turnover because it really does affect the business of council. Illiterate people, not illiterate in some instances, functionally illiterate, but in some instances, people who just are new to the system.
They've never read any municipal administrative law.
No, Structures Act, Systems Act, Finance Management Act, and all of that. So then I'm trying to present a case that makes it very difficult for smaller parties, and therefore the banding together becomes important if coming together of and remember, some of the parties that are coming together are untested in local government election. So the only reference point they have is a national election. And if you look at how they campaigned and what they relied on in terms of boots on the ground, you could really map very small dots of having significant boots on the ground. And the question is, between the previous election and now, have they managed to build structures, infrastructure? Because one of the things that the ANC has introduced, and I think it's a thing that works across the world anyway in our politics, is door-to-door. Yeah. But you can only do door-to-door with people who understand the local issues, who understand your offering to society. And I think for the first time, I discussed this with Jonathan after last year's election. I said, wouldn't it be nice if you could launch a manifesto for each and every municipality? I think that's where we are going to go. You're not going to be able to have a one-size-fit-all offer in this coming election. People in Joburg are not interested in your personality. I can promise you now. And I can get the waves. There's an oncoming thing here where I'm not sure if I'm happy with it, but anyway.
There's definitely a wave.
There's a wave coming. There's a wave coming. I'm not sure if it's Omicron or something, but there's a deadly wave coming.
A Delta variant.
A Delta variant of sorts. And it's coming fast, and it's coming to someone's backyard at first, and then to the city. Okay, let's leave that. But the point really, on a serious note, is I think next year's election is going to be very difficult. We are going to need to understand the impulses, and this is now more on the side of the parties. I think lastly, on the side of the voters must get over their hangover of disappointment with parties they've associated with before and get out to vote and make different choices, and that's what democracy is about. The minute we carry on, this idea of big parties, small parties, who would have thought the ANC would get 8.5 million votes in the national election? You couldn't comprehend it a few election cycles ago, but it's there, and that's why I'm saying we're in a very transitional process. People need to make choices. The nice thing about local elections is that you can make a ward choice. Who represents me in my ward? And I think there is an opportunity for independent candidates, but as we all know, there's not enough funding. There's not, but we've seen it. We've seen it in eThekwini in a by-election, and next to Ward 33, I think Ward 31, Ward 32 there, bordering, where the DA lost a ward to an independent candidate because people were unhappy with what the DA is doing. And suddenly, nobody is sure who is a threat to who. The DA lost a ward to MK.
Yes, no one saw that coming. Yeah.
Nobody thought, the DA could, get a award. People said MK is a KZN party. They won a by-election in Saldanha Bay. The DA lost the provincial ballot in Christopher Papas's municipality.
Jonathan was remarking on that.
To MK party. Yeah. So you can't say, we sure MK is going to eat in the ANC pond, this is going to happen. It's going to be such a fluid election. And I think it's good that we start talking about it and start, as those people with the responsibility to inform the public, and start to think carefully what is the kind of work we need to do to mine the best information that then helps empower the public to make the right choices or to understand the uncertainty. But I think that's what this election is going to be about, sheer uncertainty.
Yeah, utter uncertainty.
Chaos.
There's
wailing in fires in the streets.
Yes, there's so much. And I think one of the points that you've made so well is just how different the election's going to be in different parts of the country. So the Johannesburg election is going to be fundamentally different to the eThekwini election,
Absolutely.
to the Cape Town election,
Nelson Mandela
election, to Umsunduzi election, to Maluti Apofong. I think just on the small, medium-sized parties and their focus areas, I think Action SA did provide a blueprint in 2021. where they identified, I think it was 6 municipalities, three in Gauteng,
Yeah.
3 in KZN.
Yeah.
They realized they didn't have the resources to contest much above that. And I think they managed to get about 2.1% of the vote, sort of 5th or 6th. And
position them about number 5.
Yeah, number 5 in the country.
Yeah.
So that was a very, I think, clever move, and they probably should have taken a leaf out of that book for the general election last year, rather than contesting all 9 provinces. But I think, there's so much to unpack. We're going to take a quick break shortly, and when we come back, one of the things I think we need to interrogate, Paul, with Lukhona is the ANC on its deathbed. Is it on its deathbed, or are there people in the ANC who want to potentially bring back EFF and MK and resuscitate the ANC that way? And then I'm really, really fascinated by MK. Yeah. And I know, Lukhona, you've got some thoughts on that, so look forward to discussing that after the break. Fantastic. Thanks. Welcome back to the second half of this Real National Dialogue podcast with myself, Jonathan Mokes, Paul Berkowitz, and our special guest, Lukhona Mnguni. Lukhona, lots to unpack. Lots to unpack. And next year's local government election, as you've said, it's going to be fascinating. It's going to be chaos. I still think that there are some significant trends that have emerged since last year's general election, through by-elections, through some public polling that is available, that I think will hold until next year's local government election. I think one trend, which Paul has written about very, very well and shown some of his amazing visualizations, is the PA in the Western Cape. And I think the DA is nervously looking over its shoulder, particularly in rural Western Cape. I think the DA themselves, you alluded to it, a little bit of movement happening in Johannesburg. I think the DA is probably going to do pretty well in the metros, largely driven by differential turnout. That's another big subject to discuss. But I think the other trend, and I'm willing to put my neck on the block here, or head on the block, is that I think MK is going to do very well next year. And this is an interesting one, because a lot of the analysis that is going out at the moment is looking at MK's performance or lack of performance in Parliament, the internal strife, the multiple secretaries generals that they have, the discussion about, well, it's just the Jacob Zuma KZN party. I think you've said MK won award off the DA in eThekwini. MK won award in Saldanha Bay in the Western Cape. I've been particularly fascinated at how they've contested by-elections in Nelson Mandela Bay Metro. I think they achieved 10% in Motherwell, definitely not a Zulu area.
20% in an Mfuleni ward. We've seen activity in Gauteng and Northwest.
Yeah. In Mpumalanga, they obviously had a very, very successful election. There's obviously isiZulu speakers in Mpumalanga, but in Mpumalanga they leapfrogged the EFF in a few by-elections this particular year. They've got seats in legislatures, Northwest. What do you think is actually powering MK? Because in my mind, and I think our friends in the media are getting this a bit wrong, because they say, well, MK is on its way to destruction because it's just riven by internal factions and fighting. But it's quite evident that they're still surging. They've got an electoral base. Polling, Social Research Foundation, Brenthurst earlier this year, even the South African Institute of Race Relations, all show that MK is really pretty much holding its base from last year, and by-elections seem to indicate that they're making ground. I mean, what's going on there?
There's a lot going on in MK. There's a lot, and I've tried to pay as close attention as possible. I mean, I just said to you, I cried in 2007 when Zuma was elected president of the ANC, but I've tried to make sure very hard that, that was me as a citizen rather than me as, a thinking and an analytic cap. I may not like the man, but I've got to appreciate and analyze him in a fair and objective way, be loyal to the data and what it tells us. The first thing that MK got right, that I have never seen or have never read of in South Africa's election since 1994, is propaganda. There's a reason propaganda is taught as an art of communication in politics. And political science students would know that. MK got propaganda right. They got the right channels. They got the right people. They were more successful with TikTok more than any other party. They understood the temperature of the country and were willing to respond to a segment of society and alienate many other segments. So to say that, the constitution must be thrown away, you can't underestimate the feelings that this constitution has not delivered the democratic dividend. But we all know, at an objective fact, that the problem is not the constitution, it's the people who occupy government and parliament, how they pass legislation or not pass legislation, how they implement or not implement, how they are corrupted or they don't steal from the public purse. The constitution has nothing to do with a 360 million rands contract to Ket Matlala in the South African Police Service. It has nothing to do with that. So, but because the sentiment, and you weaponize something and you get a hook on it, and you then drive the propaganda on that. So propaganda was probably and continues to be one of the biggest weapons of MK, because there is actually a segment of our society that is completely checking out in our constitutional democratic architecture. And so by attacking that constitutional democracy architecture, MK party responds to those people. A lot of the parties that came on board came with the lens of still wanting to preserve and defend the constitutional democracy architecture. And as a result of that, people saw them as, you are preserving the status quo, you are part of the establishment. And it was fascinating, and we were talking about this, how people can reinvent themselves as anti-establishment people when they were inside the establishment themselves and had enough time. I mean, but the other thing that MK could do, that the ANC couldn't do with Ramaphosa, or couldn't counter, in its propaganda, it could tell you the achievements of Jacob Zuma in government. Whilst the whole country was talking about how he hollowed the state, how he broke institutions, how there was state capture, they were saying, yeah, but on HIV and AIDS, he succeeded. And why is that? Because his predecessor was highly attacked and heavily attacked on that, right? He delivered free education. Now we know that NSFAS is a bit of a mess. It doesn't matter. But he made that announcement on the eve of the Nasrec conference at 5:30 a.m. Before we all woke up and went on our shifts at Nasrec at the ANC's national conference. So they could put certain things to the public and say, this is what this man has done. We hear all the bad things, but we love him for this, because these were championing our cause. The ANC couldn't counter that, because if they did, they would also be discrediting themselves, because these things were achieved actually under their banner. But they couldn't put across what Ramaphosa had achieved since taking over in 2018. And that was the biggest weakness that was confronting there. So that's the first, propaganda. The second, I strongly believe MK is working with serious intelligence networks. Because if you look at what happened to the ANC, just take Umlazi, which is probably the greatest catastrophe. Umlazi and Msunduzi. Because in Msunduzi, the ANC wins that municipality just over 50% in 2021. MK takes 52% of the vote in Msunduzi. That's turning the entire thing around. You go to Umlazi, where the ANC could get easily 80% support in a VD, they were 20%, 15%. But guess what? The leaders, when they were campaigning in those communities, the people were coming out wearing ANC t-shirts. Now, there's this concept we talk about, sleeper cells in political parties. You can only plant sleeper cells if you've got a good understanding of how intelligence works, and you've got a way of recruiting people to be sleeper cells, and they deliver. So they are wearing ANC t-shirts, but they're actually not campaigning for the ANC. And So that's intelligence operative work. So I feel there are a number of spooks in MK Party. Of course, it's not just surprising. The president of MK Party himself.
Well, it's his bread and butter,
said,
isn't it?
You know, he would have been a spook himself,
Yes.
and so on. But you also know how much Zuma weaponized the intelligence services
Yes, of course.
for his politics and his political gains. I mean, at some point, we even had Parliament with a grabber and network for journalists, you know, going off like, what the hell? I mean, that was the height of you know, his presidency. The other thing about MK Party is, and I won't exhaust all of them so that I can preserve some for future. But I'm gonna give you something so simple. The MK Party calls the ANC Kwagogo, grandmother's place. The power in that is that MK Party actually is the first party. The EFF tried it a little bit, but MK Party is the first party that said, we actually have nothing wrong to say about the ANC. The ANC is our home. First breakaway party to really say that. They didn't blame ANC members for anything. They simply said, but to help the ANC, we need to deal with this Ramaphosa. So what they managed in their propaganda was to separate the ANC from the ANC of Ramaphosa. And if you looked at the trends on X, ANC of Ramaphosa was trending almost every day. Top 10 trends in the country in the heat of the election campaign. And I remember, you know, at a focus group discussion, somebody saying, no, I'm voting ANC, wow, and then another saying, you know, I was not going to vote for the ANC, but these MK people are irritating me, so I'm coming back, I'm going to vote for the ANC because we were together with these comrades and they also messed up. And this guy said, no, my sister, you and I are not fighting. Mm-hmm. If Ramaphosa were to go, I'd come back to the ANC. And this element of Kwagogo, then they take the name to create familiarity. They printed the pull-up banners. If you went to some MK events, you'd see a pull-up banner with Oliver Tambo's face, with Chris Ani's face. These are important elements. COPE tried it. They said, you know, Congress of the People, we're taking away the Freedom Charter. But hey, this ANC has elected Zuma. We can't be part of it. EFF said, these cardinal pillars are ours from the Youth League. But this ANC that is keeping these Zuptas in place. So they demonize the entire universe. Whereas MK could be able to say, no, we will not close the door that we might go back. And then, of course, classically, Zuma then says, oh, by the way, I'm still a member and I'm going to fight.
Yes.
Now, these are the basics that differentiate MK from any other thing. So whilst most people, as we would communicate among ourselves, how do you tap into dissatisfied or disaffected ANC voters, MK had the language. He said, no, here is a home. And people could understand that home. The songs they could understand, the leaders they could understand, the people they were familiar with. The thing that had changed was the language. Why have we been dissatisfied now with the ANC? It's not delivering. What is constraining the ANC? It's the constitution. And then after that, you roll out. I mean, of course, MK is very
And
well
Ramaphosa is
resourced.
synonymous with the Constitution as
Ramaphosa
well.
is,
Isn't he?
yes, exactly,
Yes,
as the broker
Yeah.
of the Constitution and the Constitutional Assembly. So it's this Ramaphosa defending this Constitution is not going to take us anywhere. But then MK was quite well resourced. Well resourced in the sense that when I went to eThekwini 3 months or so before elections, I was guaranteed to see some MK thing, whether it's a bucket hat, whether it's a T-shirt, whether it's a car sticker or something like that. And because I suppose of Zuma's influence, his proximity to a degree to the Gaba brothers, their dominance in the taxi industry, there was a sense that MK had captured the taxi network, and therefore by capturing the taxi network, they had captured the informal traders in taxi ranks. And by capturing the informal traders in taxi ranks, they were most visible in the high foot traffic volume areas. So, and because they were not trying to be nuanced, it's easy to receive the message and transfer it. And that's what propaganda does.
Thank you for that. And I mean, I think our listeners and subscribers will be enriched for that viewpoint, because I think, I mean, the propaganda point is so powerful, and the concept of the Constitution, ANC's Ramaphosa, is there. I think the other thing that MK have perfected is constant campaigning.
Oh, no. I mean, by the way, you spoke about differential turnout for the DA.
Yes.
What MK is actually probably also managing to achieve.
Yes.
In its core base, it achieves differential turnout.
Yes.
And of course, constant campaigning. I mean, the last point, really, sorry to interject. I said MK party was the only political party that had a political program the day after election.
Yes.
When they
it
formed
was evident.
the Progressive Front, when all the aggrieved small parties were not going to get a seat. Now, if you were to go, I know people say there are a lot of political parties, but they don't tell you that, MK has killed Sarah, Shiluba, Abel Daw's party, and a few others. Those parties would not be on the ballot tomorrow if there were to be an election, because all of those people are swallowed inside MK.
And more than that, isn't it, Lukhona, that pre-election Zuma was very good at activating? We talk about organizing and community building, very good at taking faith-based communities. Mogoeng's movement comes to mind, co-opting them before the election and riding off that. And Jonathan and I have talked about how MK and ATM want to work together.
Yeah.
And we said at the moment, ATM, its command structure seems to have been captured by a specific Umtata church, and there's another beachhead for MK in the Eastern Cape.
No, of course. I mean, before ATM was formed, by the way, Zuma attended the church conference of the bishop at eThekwini Kings Park Stadium. And then ATM was formed. He was still ANC president at the time. There was no MK inside whatsoever. And again, it's because Zuma's mind, and I think people have not invested time to understand how far the fellow is willing to go for his own political survival. I mean, you'd remember during the Marikana standoff in 2012, the accusations that he even tried to start a union.
Yes.
To rival AMCU, again using intelligence services and all of these things. So yes, you've got that, and making inroads, and you're talking about him using organized organizations. I mean, if you read the constitution of MK revised, there is a council of royal what, and it's a senior structure, because he's trying to say, and that's the other thing, he's trying to say, we're going to give back this country to you, God-appointed people, traditional leaders.
Contralesa.
And you see Contralesa flirting. I mean, I saw Zolani Mkiva at an event with Zuma. You'll remember, go back to 2007, before Polokwane. Zuma was ordained as an honorary priest in eThekwini at an event. So there's always been these connections and his ability to maneuver these organized constituencies, whereas some politicians think, going to church is a gimmicky thing, this and that. Zuma understands the nodes that make this country move, and I think he tries to tap into them as much as he can.
Yeah. I think going back to the ATM point, of course, who led the assault against Cyril and Palapala in Parliament? But ATM, which is just saying.
Well, we're still waiting for the Constitutional Court judgment there.
Yes.
So
9 months, is it?
But that tells us, I mean, the road to this local government we are talking about and our political temperature, we're waiting for the judgment on Palapala. We're waiting for the Madlanga Commission on the Mkwanazi allegations. All of these things could turn the country upside down before the election.
So actually on that, because I was maybe... turning the country upside down would be Cyril Ramaphosa perhaps not lasting until 2027. But even...
Highly possible.
Highly possible. But even if we talk about him lasting until 2027 and there's an ANC elective conference, we're still waiting, as you said, for the NGC, which has to take place this year, according to the ANC. But
apparently in December, I doubt.
Apparently in December, but with the track record of the NEC being postponed and postponed and postponed. What I'm interested in, especially looking at MK, so the front runner by all accounts, is Paul Mashatile, the current deputy president. We hear rumours that he may have done some deals with the Secretary General and Balula, and that may be a ticket of sorts. But let's just, as a hypothetical scenario, say Paul Mashatile succeeds Cyril Ramaphosa in 2027. A Paul Mashatile presidency of the ANC is definitely a presidency that's not going to support the current configuration of the GNU. I've wondered whether he would. So you spoke in your introduction about the ANC being on its deathbed, which I would concur with. I think the decline of the ANC is just exponential at this point in time. Clearly, there isn't a do not resuscitate order in place, because it's just continuing. But do you think someone like Paul Mashatile may actually try and rebuild the ANC with its constituent parts? So look to bring back the EFF. And he's got a relationship with Julius. Bring back MK. And is that a path to victory potentially in 2029, where the ANC, MK, EFF can get back to 50% plus one? Is that a potential scenario, or is it too far gone?
Look, I mean, the three parties currently in parliament are sitting at about 64%, ANC, EFF, MK, which is what has been at what has been at the heart of the disagreements, whether, Malusi Gigaba says we shouldn't have done, we must now say Dr. Malusi Gigaba.
Yes.
We must respect people, man. Dr. Gigaba, saying he doesn't believe, his view was that they shouldn't have gone to a coalition government with the DA, Solima Paila of the South African Communist Party. So let's say for a minute there's somebody who would have been amenable to bringing those three people together. Of course, I think Paul would be one such person. The question is whether or not the EFF and MK party would truly believe that if they went back and were not on the ballot, there would be enough of a deal inside the party. But what I can guarantee you is that if that happened, there would definitely be a split in the ANC, which would then, of course, probably be counterproductive. I still believe, anyway, without MK and EFF going back, if Mashatile succeeds, I say to people, there's one more split. I'm not sure how it's going to happen, but I think there's one more split left in the ANC. And that's partly why the ANC is on free fall. And I call it people gaming the disintegration of the ANC. So I think nobody's under any illusion that the ANC goes back, big bang, beyond 50%. Of course, I mean, theoretically, with MK and EFF, they could push and be a vital force that edges back to 50%. But I believe there's going to be a split in the ANC, because what everybody now is probably thinking about is that in a fragmented environment, I'm better off with my fraction of the pie, and I use it to bargain my way back into it. And I mean, remember that as we're talking about this and the 2026 local government elections, in actual fact, are going to pose a massive political headache for our politics. Because there are going to be sections there by your Pongolas and stuff, northern KwaZulu-Natal, where municipalities will be hung, and the DA is not a feature in some of them. And the IFP suddenly looks at the ANC, they are not at 50% together. Then they say MK, but MK might say, but hey, legislature in the province of KwaZulu-Natal,
yes.
GPU. They might not want to say GNU, right? Or they might leave the GPU as is, and, but in the municipalities, start working with the ANC. And I think that would... It complicates the entire governance logic. Yes. Now, it complicates it because in South Africa, parties like centralizing coalitions. If you go to other countries around the world, there's understanding and, decentralization. So it makes it easier for the ANC to continue working with the DA nationally, because anyway, what happens in Msunduzi and whatever, as long as the municipality is working, we will be fine. And if our parties didn't find each other, as it happened here in Gauteng province, I mean, the biggest pushback from Paul himself was that, look, the DA must not make its problems in Gauteng with Panyaza our problems nationally. We are very fine nationally and we are proceeding well. I am not too sure that he automatically abandons the current configuration. If you looked before the Nasrec conference of 2022, when he was to ascend as deputy president, I mean, I got a call from, actually I bumped into somebody in business and they were saying, do you think it's a good idea for us to take Paul to Davos at the World Economic Forum and start setting him up? He was doing meetings in Stellenbosch with some, business leaders. You'll remember Mark Brown of Nedbank, before he retired, hosted him at the JSE with CEOs and so on. So it's not that automatic. It's not that automatic. And I think he's got good rapport with very big business. And I also think he's got serious interests. I mean, you can't be staying in multi-million rand mansions. And
just have to look at News 24 recently.
Exactly. And not have interests that are tied. Who are his neighbors?
Good.
Who are his
Good
neighbors
point,
in those mansions? And what kind of conversations is he having with his neighbors? His wife's twin is implicated in the next national lottery, venture. So all of these things add up, and I think at some point people will choose more on what, as I said, the self-interest is. And I think if he feels that he can hold the current arrangement together. I mean, you look at how visible he has been. I mean, David Mabuza, the late, may his soul rest in peace. I mean, we would ask, where's the cat? What has happened? Where is he? But Paul is rather very visible. Ramaphosa is, handing out quite a lot of work. I think he's quite mindful not to make him feel alienated, because I think he also, when he felt alienated by Zuma, probably felt like he's on a self-destruction mode. So I'm really trying to, I mean, Paul Mashatile is chairing the interministerial task team on the national dialogue, for example. So I think there will be tough choices that he will make. He may well want to make an accommodation, but I don't think he'll make an entire disruption of the current arrangement as we might think.
That's interesting. I think there are so many potential scenarios that could happen between. I mean, I think there's a lot of there's a bit of a holding pattern right now in respect of the G20. So I'm quite interested to see what happens after the G20, because obviously DA ministers are very involved in some of those commissions. You've mentioned the Palapala Constitutional Court case. There's the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry. I mean, it'll also be interesting to see. I mean, I think the ANC is going to suffer quite a bruising result next year in the local government election. What does the ANC going down to 30%, 32%, 33% do for Cyril Ramaphosa? There's going to be a lot of movement.
No, I mean, and when we speak about these figures globally, they don't send the real picture. So,
true.
If because you then have to say, where does it get hit the most? So what happens when 75%, which is my prediction, I'm willing to be wrong, of municipalities in KwaZulu-Natal are under coalition government?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that happened, which reconfigured patronage, because it's really about a reconfiguration of patronage networks. So when the ANC lost Johannesburg, Tshwane, and just held on to Ekurhuleni, lost Nelson Mandela Bay in 2016, there was actually a migration of some of its patronage networks to the metros where it still had dominance, Buffalo City, Free State, and eThekwini. But because then there was a heightened scavenging for resources and competition over the patronage, those municipalities continue to deteriorate and effectively almost lost eThekwini. They needed a coalition partner. We forget this. The nice thing there is that it's not an executive mayoral system. That's why it sort of gets papered over the cracks. Almost lost Mangaung. At some point, there was a mayor from the African Social Democratic Party or something in Mangaung at some point. So I'm trying to say, when you say dropping down to 30%, it means a loss of patronage networks in key regions of the ANC's support. And as a result of that, it may well kill the tempo and potency of certain party structures, which then influences delegations to the National Conference of 2027. Because suddenly you don't have enough machinery to pump those branches with and so on. And then you suddenly think, will KZN, for example, bring the least number of delegates it has ever brought since 2007 to a conference?
I'm
So
glad
we've
you
got to
actually
think about
picked
those
up on
things.
that point, Lukhona, because it's exactly what I was thinking as you're talking. The common thread is the disintegration of the ANC. It's colouring our discussion. MK, you said, MK very good at propaganda, very good at seizing an opportunity, but it's not like the ANC didn't drop all those balls that MK could pick up.
Absolutely.
Sure, Zuma's really good at exploiting those patronage systems and networks that the ANC had set up, so already dealt quite, if not a mortal, then a critical blow in KZN. But I think I agree with you. It's a dynamic effect. As the ANC loses more and more pieces of the metros, as it stops being the party with the plurality, probably in Gauteng in the Gauteng metros, it's going to be a big loss of those patronage networks. And let's be honest, it's not like Joburg. Any of the coalition partners are trying to improve governance or service delivery. It's who can get what. The EFF said they'll join in Joburg if they get transport. Kenny's already, and under the Patriotic Alliance, money has already been sent back to National Treasury or wasted or diverted. So I guess what we haven't spoken about, what Jonathan and I sometimes discuss going back and forth, is what will be left of the ANC to build anything with, what will be left of the ANC's patronage networks, or even branch structures after the next local government election. Because like you said, we can look at an aggregate figure for the ANC, maybe they'll have whatever percent, but it's going to be concentrated in rural areas. It's going to be concentrated in areas where the money and the patronage is diffused. It's going to be a lot harder to build something up.
No, absolutely. It's going to be harder to build something up. It's going to be harder to sustain structures. At some point, it was taken for granted that regional chairpersons are future mayors in most of the regions. And suddenly now the regional chairperson doesn't have anywhere to go and must either find employment or if they are capable of finding employment. And I'm not sure if the ANC is having serious, deep thinking, including whether it reconfigures how it is structured as a party and reconsiders certain things, because clearly it's budget. I mean, you take levies from public representatives, so your revenue streams also decrease just to run the party. The ANC has full-time regional secretaries, full-time provincial secretaries. And that's why, on the other flip side, because I was in the Durban political party funding summit, and the Minister of Finance comes to make a declaration that the political parties must be fully funded by the state. So I think in one instance, they are thinking about that loss of patronage, and then how do they raid from the tax to sustain or compensate for what would have been lost. But it becomes a very much more competitive environment where you can no longer influence willy-nilly the appointment of a city manager or the firing of a city manager or the flow of certain contracts, because you have to now bargain with other people, or in some instances you are not even in government in the council, and now you are being, and of course there are other things that are going to probably be there. The dynamic of the election might open up opportunities for new investigations, relooking at some contracts, arrest of people. There's a lot, there's so much that can spawn out of the electoral outcome and this loss of patronage and how it is organized. I mean, you can no longer use town halls for free for party events or abuse
Or block
buses,
block
other
other
parties from
Yeah.
entering and so on. So it's a wide range of issues, but I think it's one that it will make South Africans extremely nervous because there'll probably be more chaos and uncertainty in those councils and so on. But I think in the next 15 to 20 years, it would be a good transition for democracy.
Yeah. Well, Lukhona, you've given us about 25 to 30 different topics for future podcasts in this conversation.
Well, I wish you well, and of course, we will continue to chat on and off air now that you guys are
very
on
much.
air.
Well, thank you very much for your time. We will definitely have to bring you back as we approach the next local government election. There's a week is a long time in politics definitely applies in South Africa. So Thank you very much again. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
And thank you very, very much to our listeners and subscribers. Please share and like and go forth with the propaganda about the South Africa Brief and the real national dialogue. And we look forward to speaking to you soon. Thanks very much.